Welcome to Nightmare Lullabies. Here, we bring you chilling tales to keep you on edge while helping you unwind. If you enjoy our stories, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Got a creepy story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We might feature it in a future video. Now sit back, relax, and let the story begin. It was during a summer music festival in California that I had this unsettling experience. My friends and I had been planning it for months, and we were ready to have a great time. As the sun set and the headliner came on, the crowd was packed tight. Everyone was dancing, singing, and enjoying the music. That's when I noticed him, a man standing a little too close. At first, I thought he was just part of the crowd, but no matter where I moved, he followed. He wasn't dancing or enjoying the show. He was just watching me. I whispered to my friend about it, and she told me to ignore him. But when I turned back around, he was even closer, and now he was smiling. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was unsettling. I decided to move to a different part of the crowd, but he followed. I told a security guard nearby, and they approached him. The guy pretended like nothing was wrong, even laughing it off. The guard warned him to back off, and for a while, I thought it was over. But when we left the concert and were walking back to our car, he was there again, leaning against a street lamp. He waved like we were old friends. My friend called the police, and thankfully they arrived quickly. I never saw him again, but to this day, I always keep an eye out in crowds. At a 3-day camping festival in the UK, I woke up in the middle of the night to someone unzipping my tent. My first thought was that it was one of my friends coming back from a late-night set. I whispered, "What are you doing?" But when the tent flap opened, it wasn't my friend. It was a stranger, a young guy with a blank expression. He didn't say anything, just stared at me like he was trying to figure something out. I yelled, "You've got the wrong tent." He hesitated for a moment before mumbling something about looking for his friend and backing away. I zipped the tent shut and couldn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning I asked around, but no one knew who he was. To this day, I wonder if he really had the wrong tent or if his intentions were something else entirely. It was a perfect summer evening, and the outdoor concert was alive with energy. My favorite band was headlining, and I'd been looking forward to this night for months. I was with a group of friends, but as the band took the stage, we got separated in the crowd. I didn't mind too much. I was so caught up in the music. The moment they started playing one of their most popular songs, I decided to pull out my phone to record it. The crowd was tightly packed, but everyone around me seemed to be doing the same, raising their phones to capture the moment. Just as I hit record, I felt a hard bump from behind. It wasn't unusual. In a crowd like this, people were constantly brushing past each other. But this was different. It was deliberate. I stumbled forward slightly and instinctively tightened my grip on my phone, but it was gone. I froze for a second, confused. I looked at my hands, thinking maybe I'd dropped it, but there was nothing. My heart sank as I realized what had just happened. Someone had pickpocketed me. I turned around quickly, scanning the sea of faces. A man in a baseball cap and a hoodie was moving swiftly through the crowd, weaving between people with an unnatural urgency. He wasn't looking at the stage or enjoying the music. His focus was on getting away. I tried to follow him, pushing through the crowd, shouting, "Hey, stop!" But the music was too loud, and my voice was drowned out by the cheers and singing. People turned to look at me, but no one seemed to notice the man I was chasing. He disappeared into the dense crowd, and I was left standing there, panicked and frustrated. My phone wasn't just a phone. It had my concert ticket, my ID in the case, and dozens of photos I hadn't backed up yet. I pushed my way toward the edge of the crowd, where the noise was slightly quieter. I spotted an event staff member wearing a neon vest and told them what had happened. The staffer nodded sympathetically and explained that pickpocketing was a common problem at events like this. "We can file a report," she said, leading me to the security tent. "But honestly, these guys are pros. They're in and out before anyone can catch them." At the security tent, they took down my description of the man and asked if I had activated tracking on my phone. Unfortunately, I hadn't. They said they'd keep an eye out, but warned me not to get my hopes up. Feeling defeated, I borrowed my friend's phone to call my bank and cancel everything. I spent the rest of the concert stressed out, trying to figure out how I was going to get home without my ID or money. After the show, I joined my friends, who had no idea any of this had happened. They were buzzing about how incredible the performance was, but I could barely focus. We made our way to the parking lot, and I noticed I wasn't the only one looking frustrated. Other people were talking to security, holding their empty pockets or pointing to where they thought their belongings had gone missing. Later that week, I bought a new phone and tried to move on, but the experience left me shaken. Now, whenever I go to a concert, I wear a crossbody bag that zips shut, and I keep my phone tucked away unless I absolutely need it. The concert was supposed to be one of the highlights of my summer, but it turned into a harsh lesson about being cautious in large crowds. It was a long-awaited weekend, and the music festival was everything I had hoped it would be. Amazing bands, great food, and an electric atmosphere. My friends and I had pitched our tents in the designated camping area. We were part of a small community of festival goers who all seemed friendly enough, sharing snacks, trading stories, and laughing late into the night. The second night of the festival, after hours of dancing and singing along with the headliners, I was completely exhausted. My friends decided to stay out a bit longer, but I wanted to get some sleep. Navigating my way back to our camping spot in the dark was tricky, but eventually, I found our little cluster of tents. Or so I thought. When I reached the spot where my tent should have been, it was gone. I froze, staring at the empty patch of trampled grass. For a moment, I thought I was just in the wrong spot. Everything looked so different in the dark. I walked a few steps in either direction, shining my flashlight on every tent I passed, but mine wasn't there. I laughed nervously, thinking it had to be some kind of prank. My friends loved to mess with me, and it wouldn't be the first time they'd pulled something like this. But as I kept searching, the sinking feeling in my stomach grew. I asked a nearby camper if they'd seen anyone messing with my tent, but they just shrugged and said they hadn't noticed anything unusual. By now, my phone battery was nearly dead, and I realized I had no way to contact my friends. I decided to wait by the campfire near our spot, hoping they'd return soon. When my friends finally stumbled back hours later, laughing and carrying on, I immediately confronted them. "All right, where is it? Very funny, guys." They stared at me blankly. "What are you talking about?" one of them asked. "My tent," I said, my voice rising. "Where did you put it?" They all looked at each other, genuinely confused. "We didn't touch your tent," another friend said. "We've been at the stage the whole time." A chill ran down my spine. If it wasn't them, then who? We spread out to search, but it was useless. My tent, my sleeping bag, and my backpack with all my stuff were gone. Someone had stolen everything. The festival staff were sympathetic, but not particularly helpful. "It happens more often than you'd think," one of them said. "Sometimes people take tents thinking they're theirs, and sometimes," he trailed off, his expression apologetic. I spent the rest of the night crammed into my friend's two-person tent, barely sleeping. The next day, I had to borrow clothes and supplies from my friends just to get through the weekend. The worst part wasn't even the inconvenience. It was the thought of someone watching our camp, waiting for the right moment to take everything. I kept looking over my shoulder for the rest of the festival, wondering if the thief was still nearby, blending in with the crowd. Since then, I've been hyper-aware of my belongings at festivals. I lock up anything valuable in my car, and I always double-check the security of my tent. It was a hard lesson to learn, but I'd rather be overprepared than lose everything again. It was a scorching summer evening, and I was at one of the biggest outdoor music festivals of the year. The air smelled of fried food, spilled beer, and sunscreen. I had come alone this time because none of my friends were interested in the lineup, but that didn't bother me. I enjoyed the freedom of wandering between stages and setting my own pace. The crowd was massive, and I loved people watching between sets. There were the usual types: groups of friends taking selfies, couples dancing together, and a few overly enthusiastic fans screaming lyrics at the top of their lungs. It was all part of the charm. As I was making my way to the main stage, someone tapped me on the arm. I turned to see a man who looked to be in his mid-30s. He was dressed like any other festival goer, shorts, a tank top, and sunglasses perched on his head. "Hey," he said, his voice overly cheerful. "You dropped something." I gave a quick glance around. "I don't think I did," I said, smiling politely. It seemed like an innocent enough interaction. No, you did," he insisted. "It's right over there." He pointed vaguely to the ground behind me. I hesitated but decided to check, just in case. There was nothing there. When I looked back, he was still standing there, watching me with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Maybe someone else dropped it, I said, brushing it off and turning to leave. Wait, he called after me, walking to keep up. What's your name? I didn't want to be rude, but I also didn't want to engage with a stranger who was clearly looking for more than casual conversation. Sorry, I'm meeting someone, I lied, picking up my pace. But he didn't stop. He followed me, still talking. You look like you're having fun. What's your favorite band here? Are you here alone? His persistence was starting to make me uneasy. I ducked into a nearby crowd, hoping to lose him, but a minute later, I saw him again, weaving through the people toward me. Hey, he said, as if we'd been separated by accident. There you are. At this point, my heart was racing. I spotted a group of girls who looked around my age, and quickly approached them. Hi, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. This guy has been following me. Can I hang with you for a bit? They immediately welcomed me into their circle, and one of them turned to glare at the man, who had stopped a few feet away. He stood there awkwardly for a moment before finally walking off in another direction. I stayed with the girls for the rest of the set, grateful for their kindness. Later that night, I saw him again, standing near one of the food trucks. He didn't approach me, but the sight of him sent a shiver down my spine. I decided to call it a night, and left the festival earlier than planned. The next day, I shared what happened with the event staff. They thanked me for reporting it and promised to keep an eye out for anyone matching his description. I don't know if they ever found him, but I learned a valuable lesson. Trust your gut, and don't be afraid to ask for help when something feels off. I still go to festivals, but now I'm much more careful, even if it means sticking closer to the crowds or striking up conversations with other people to avoid being alone. It's better to be safe than sorry. It was the last night of a 3-day rock festival, and the energy in the air was electric. My friend Laura and I had been planning this weekend for months. We'd saved up for VIP passes, booked a nearby hotel, and mapped out all the acts we wanted to see. Everything had been perfect, until the final night. The headliner was about to take the stage, and the crowd was massive. We were in the middle of it all, dancing and singing along to the warm-up band. Laura was always the life of the party, and she'd been pulling me into random conversations with strangers all weekend. It was fun but a little exhausting. As the last song of the opening act ended, she leaned in and shouted over the noise, "I'm going to grab a drink." "Want anything?" "No, I'm good," I shouted back. She gave me a thumbs up and disappeared into the crowd. I waited where we'd been standing, assuming she'd be back in a few minutes. But 10 minutes passed, then 15. The main act was starting, and Laura was nowhere to be seen. I tried texting her, but the service was terrible with so many people in one place. The messages wouldn't send. At first, I wasn't too worried. Laura was independent and often got sidetracked talking to people. She'd probably made a new friend at the bar, or found someone who shared her favorite band. But as the first song ended and she still wasn't back, I started to get nervous. I decided to head toward the drink stands, pushing my way through the tightly packed crowd. It took forever to get there, and when I finally arrived, she wasn't anywhere in sight. I checked the bathrooms, the food trucks, even the smoking area. Nothing. The more I looked, the more panicked I became. I asked a couple of people nearby if they'd seen her, a woman with bright red hair and a black leather jacket, but no one had. I started to feel a little dizzy, the kind of anxiety that makes your stomach twist. I found a security guard and told him my friend was missing. He nodded and said they'd keep an eye out, but his casual tone didn't do much to calm me. I went back to our original spot, hoping she'd returned, but it was empty. By the time the headliner was halfway through their set, I was frantic. I checked the exits, wondering if maybe she'd gone back to the hotel without telling me. But I couldn't imagine her leaving without saying something. Finally, after what felt like hours, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Laura. "I'm fine. Meet me by the car after the show." Relief washed over me, but I was also confused. Why hadn't she come back to get me? Why hadn't she explained what happened? I decided to wait until the end of the concert to find out. When I got to the parking lot, Laura was sitting on the hood of the car, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. "Where were you?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. "Oh, I ran into an old friend," she said nonchalantly. "We got caught up talking, and I lost track of time. Why didn't you text me earlier? I asked, still frustrated. She shrugged. I didn't think it was a big deal. Sorry if I worried you. I wanted to believe her, but something about her demeanor felt off. Laura was usually so considerate, so it didn't make sense for her to brush it off like this. And when I asked her who this old friend was, she couldn't give me a straight answer. To this day, I don't know what really happened that night. Laura never brought it up again, and I didn't push her. But every time I think back to her sudden disappearance, I get this uneasy feeling, like there was more to the story than she let on. Last summer, I went to an outdoor music festival with my cousin Jake. It was one of those massive events with multiple stages, food trucks, and people dressed in all kinds of crazy outfits. We were there for the atmosphere as much as the music, and it had been an amazing day, until the sun went down. Around 9 p.m., Jake and I got separated. It wasn't a big deal at first. We'd been splitting up all day to catch different bands, and always managed to find each other later. He texted me saying he was checking out a smaller stage on the far side of the venue, so I decided to explore the merch stands while I waited for him. That's when I noticed someone watching me. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The festival was packed, and people were constantly moving around. But every time I looked up, this one guy was standing nearby, his eyes locked on me. He was wearing a black hoodie, and one of those plain white masks that cover your whole face. It didn't seem like part of a costume, just unsettlingly blank. I told myself he was probably just a fan of some obscure band, using the mask as a quirky accessory. But no matter where I went, he was there. When I ducked into the merch tent, he followed. When I stopped to grab a drink, he stood just a few feet away, not ordering anything, just waiting. I tried to shake him by weaving through the crowd, but he always reappeared. Finally, I decided to confront him. Maybe I was overreacting, and he'd laugh it off as a misunderstanding. I walked right up to him and said, "Can I help you with something?" He didn't answer. He just tilted his head slightly, the way a dog does when it hears a strange noise. Up close, the mask was even creepier. It had no features, just two empty eye holes and a faint outline of a mouth. "Look," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "If you're trying to be funny, it's not working. Leave me alone." He didn't move, didn't say a word. I turned and walked away quickly, my heart pounding. When I glanced over my shoulder, he was gone. I felt a wave of relief, thinking maybe I'd scared him off. But then I got a text from Jake. "Where are you?" "I'm by the food trucks." I hurried over, desperate to find someone familiar. When I reached the food trucks, Jake was waiting, looking annoyed. "Why didn't you answer your phone?" he asked. "I didn't get any calls," I said, pulling out my phone to check. That's when I noticed something chilling. There was a text in my sent messages. "I'm by the food trucks. Come find me." I hadn't sent it. Before I could say anything, Jake pointed over my shoulder. "Is that the guy you were talking about?" I turned and saw the masked man standing near the edge of the crowd. But this time, he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Jake. Without thinking, I grabbed Jake's arm and said, "Let's go." We left the festival early, and I kept looking over my shoulder the entire walk to the parking lot. The masked man didn't follow us, or if he did, we didn't see him again. But the thought of that unsent text still haunts me. Whoever he was, he wasn't just watching me. He had my number. A few years ago, I went to a weekend festival in the mountains with my best friend, Ava. It was one of those boho festivals where people wore flower crowns, danced barefoot, and painted their faces with glitter. Ava and I were both excited to disconnect from our daily lives and just soak in the music and vibes. The festival grounds were sprawling, with stages nestled between towering trees and cozy bonfire spots scattered throughout. On the second night, Ava and I were wandering near one of the smaller stages, looking for a good spot to sit. That's when we saw her. She had long, dark hair and was wearing a crown made of feathers, deep purples, blacks, and a splash of white that glinted in the firelight. Her dress was simple, flowing white cotton, and she was barefoot. She was standing alone, swaying gently to the music, her eyes closed. Something about her presence was magnetic, and Ava nudged me, whispering, "She looks like she's stepped out of another time." As the music ended, the girl opened her eyes and turned toward us. She smiled softly, almost like she'd been expecting us. "You look like you're searching for something," she said, her voice light and airy. It felt strange, but I shrugged it off and replied, "Just a place to sit." She pointed to a spot near the fire and said, That one's perfect." Then, without another word, she drifted into the crowd and disappeared. Ava and I laughed it off as just a quirky festival moment and took her advice, settling near the fire. The spot was cozy, and the warmth was a relief from the cool mountain air. We spent the next hour chatting with strangers and enjoying the atmosphere. But later, as we were heading back to our tent, I spotted the girl with the feather crown again. This time, she was sitting alone on a log near the edge of the forest, her back to us. I nudged Ava, but when we turned to look, she was gone. That night, I couldn't shake the strange feeling that the girl had been more than just a random festival goer. Ava brushed it off, saying I was reading too much into it. The next day, we were exploring the artisan market when I saw a stall selling feather crowns, just like the one the girl had worn. The vendor was an older woman with a kind face, and I asked her about the crowns. She smiled and said, "Ah, the feathered crown. It's a symbol of guidance, meant to lead people to what they're seeking." I told her about the girl we'd met, and the vendor's face grew thoughtful. "I've sold many crowns, but I can't say I've seen anyone like her. Still, festivals are magical places. Perhaps you were meant to find her." I never saw the girl with the feather crown again, but every time I think back to that night, I wonder, was she just another festival goer or something more? It's a mystery that still lingers, and I can't help but feel like she led us to something that weekend, even if I still don't know exactly what it was. I attended a huge music festival last summer, one of those multi-day events with camping, endless stages, and an overwhelming crowd. It was my first time going solo to such an event, and I was eager to meet new people and soak in the experience. On the second evening, the headliner was performing on the main stage, and it seemed like the entire festival was packed into that one area. I managed to weave my way toward the middle of the crowd, close enough to see the band, but far enough that I wasn't completely squished. The energy was electric, people dancing, singing, and laughing all around me. During one of the slower songs, I felt someone tap my shoulder. I turned to see a guy who looked to be in his late 20s, wearing a black hoodie despite the warm night. His face was partially shadowed by the hood, but his eyes stood out, sharp and unblinking. "Hey," he said, leaning closer to be heard over the music. "You dropped this." He held out a festival wristband, one of those paper ones that get you into specific areas. I glanced at my wrist, but my band was still securely attached. Confused, I shook my head. "It's not mine." The guy smiled slightly, almost like he knew I'd say that. "You sure? Looks like yours." I didn't know what else to do, so I just shrugged it off and turned back toward the stage. A minute later, I felt his presence again. This time, he was standing uncomfortably close, almost pressing into me. "You don't belong here," he whispered into my ear. His tone was casual, almost like he was telling me a joke, but the words sent a chill down my spine. I turned to confront him, but he was already backing away into the crowd. His smile lingered just a second too long before he disappeared into the throng of people. I stood frozen for a moment, my heart racing. What did he mean by that? And why had he chosen me to say it to? I scanned the crowd, but he was gone, swallowed up by the sea of faces. The rest of the night felt off. Every time someone brushed past me, I flinched, expecting to see the guy in the hoodie. When the show ended, I made my way back to my tent as quickly as I could, constantly glancing over my shoulder. The festival, which had felt so vibrant and alive just hours before, now seemed shadowed and eerie. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it had just been a random weirdo trying to mess with me. But as I was walking to grab some breakfast, I overheard two people talking. One of them mentioned seeing a guy in a black hoodie near the main stage the night before. "He was acting so strange," one of them said. "Just standing there, staring at people. Gave me the creeps." I didn't join their conversation, but it was enough to confirm that I hadn't imagined him. For the rest of the festival, I stuck to the edges of crowds and avoided staying out too late. Even now, I think about that moment and the words he said to me. "You don't belong here." It wasn't just the words that got to me. It was the way he said them, like he knew something about me that I didn't.